There's some really amazing new reporting in the Wall Street Journal that we just got. I'm going to share it with all of you for your reaction. Wall Street Journal just dropped a story under this headline, quote, Trump draft executive order would create board to purge generals. The panel could upend the military review process and raise concerns about the politicization of the military. Quote, the Trump transition team is considering a draft executive order that establishes a warrior board of retired senior military personnel with the power to review 3- and 4-star officers and to recommend removals of any deemed unfit for leadership. If Trump approves the order, it could fast-track the removal of generals and admirals found to be lacking in requisite leadership qualities, according to a draft of the order reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. But it could also create a chilling effect on top military officers, given the president-elect's past vow to fire woke generals, referring to officers seen as promoting diversity in the ranks at the expense of military readiness. I don't know if Paul Rieckhoff had a window into this or was just prescient, but he warned of a purge yesterday. That is literally the headline in the Wall Street Journal today. Sarah Matthews, this feels like something I know you've talked about, being sent out to lie and refute the story about Donald Trump believing that the men and women who die serving the country are suckers and losers, when it was first reported in The Atlantic and then confirmed by General John Kelly in a statement and then in his own voice in a tape with the New York Times ahead of the election. Just how vexing was it to Donald Trump that he couldn't get the military to heel to his commands and wishes?
Yeah, I do think this is an issue that has long perplexed him. We know that from John Kelly in his interview that he did with the New York Times, that John Kelly said that Trump wanted generals like Hitler's. He wants people who will carry out every wish and demand of his and receive zero pushback. And so hearing about this potential draft executive order is obviously alarming and concerning. This is something that I was raising the alarm about, of how he would reshape our government and reshape it and to fit him and his vision. And so I do think that if they decide to follow through on this, then that kind of shows what type of leader that he wants to be. He is going to politicize the military. And I don't think it just extends to, quote, woke generals and those that were pushing for diversity measures in the military. I think it's going to be, they would want to eliminate any of the generals who aren't in line with Trump's vision and maybe push back on some of his worst instincts. And so it's going to be really telling to see if there's enough blowback on this, or if they choose to pursue it once he's back in office.
Let me read some more from the story, which broke after we came on the air. Wall Street Journal reporting this, quote, as Commander-in-Chief, Trump can fire any officer at will, but an outside board whose members he appoints would bypass the Pentagon's regular promotion system, signaling across the military that he intends to purge a number of generals and admirals. The draft order says it aims to establish a review that focuses, quote, on leadership capability, strategic readiness, and commitment to military excellence. The draft doesn't specify what officers need to do or present to show if they meet those standards, but the draft order originated with one of several outside policy groups collaborating with the transition team.
I'll tell you what they need to do. They're all going to need to bend the knee. That's what they're going to need to do. One tries to maintain a certain degree of not being excessively alarmist in these cases. Yesterday it was, hey, we got to get rid of advisory consent in the Senate, because Trump just has to have his way. We have to get these appointees got to go through fast. If I want recess appointments, you'll give me recess appointments. That's what I'm going to do. They have talked in a lot of detail about how they want to kind of strip the Justice Department and the FBI down to the studs. We're sitting around, Christopher Wray sitting there thinking about whether he's going to be forcibly removed. Now we're talking about the military, right? We have three branches of government: the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive. And so when people talk about what would happen if a budding authoritarian got into the presidency, what would they start to do? What do they do in other countries when strongmen get in? One of the things they do is they seek to either formally or informally delegitimize the legislature and kind of become, that's one of the things, so the Duma becomes a rubber stamp for Putin. These other areas that aren't really, the civil service is neither really, it's the executive branch is kind of in charge of it, but it's kind of independent. Civil service, GS employees, they operate, they stay on regardless of who's in the, not political appointees. The military is like that too. Again, the commander-in-chief controls the military, but those people who are in the military, those four-star generals, are nonpartisan. They serve whoever the president is. When you start, the FBI is like that. The DOJ, in a large extent, is like that also. There are political appointees on top of it, but it's staffed by people who are committed to the rule of law. When you start to reshape those institutions, those are the moves of a classic dictator, a classic authoritarian, and we're not a week into this transition yet. And you're already seeing the early signs. We'll see whether these things all come to pass. Maybe this executive order will go away. Again, I don't want to be either too credulous or too alarmist, but these are the signs of what would happen if you were like, I'm going to start to exert authoritarianism, extend the power of the executive broadly across government and deeper into the parts of it that are not have not traditionally been under political control. These are the early inklings of that, and I think everyone should see them for what they are. Comparatively around the world, this is the playbook.
I have not seen the Wall Street Journal article, and I'm hearing you report it for the first time. But what I'm hearing actually is echoes of how the Department of Homeland Security was run in the moment that family separation was implemented and afterwards. Kirstjen Nielsen was the last Senate-confirmed Secretary of Homeland Security. Chad Wolf and Kevin McAleenan, who followed her, were not. They were acting. Tom Homan, who was basically the driving force of the family separation policy, was the acting ICE director for his tenure there. Stephen Miller would often reach out to, and we talk about this in the film, non-Senate confirmed low-level political appointees to carry out the wishes of the White House within the Department of Homeland Security. I have seen it within, I'm hearing you describe it in the military, I have seen it within the Department of Homeland. This isn't conjecture. This happened during the first term within DHS. It's how family separation was carried out, and it's how all of the immigration policies subsequent to family separation were carried out during the Trump administration.
Sarah, you lent your voice to the Harris campaign to help people imagine what a second Trump presidency would be like. I think John Heilemann is trying to strike this balance of what we're seeing. And obviously someone took this draft and went to the Wall Street Journal, again, turning to the media, another institution very much in the Trump 2.0 sights, right, as a threat, as a deterrent, to something to be managed. What is your sort of mindset about this very, very deliberate and public effort to dismantle the way the Pentagon operates?
Yeah, I think that many of us, these former Trump staffers who spoke out and went as far as endorsing Kamala Harris, although never having voted for a Democrat in my life prior until this election, we did so because we were worried about things exactly like this. We were worried that Trump would try to gain as much power as possible and reshape our government in order to carry out every wish and demand that he wants. And so this is, to me, the Trump team floating this idea to see, is this something that we can get away with? They leaked it to the media to see what the response would be. And depending on the response, maybe they won't go through with it. But there's also a very real chance that they won't care and that they will pursue it anyways, because it's going to come down to what Donald Trump wants ultimately. And I think that it shows that he has no respect for our institutions. Obviously, as you noted, he has no respect for the media as an institution. He doesn't respect our military members, as you pointed out earlier, thinks of those of our fallen soldiers as suckers and losers, wants generals to that would emulate Hitler's generals. And so it's kind of concerning to me, because it's showing that some of the warnings that we issued, being a former Trump staffer and now being a critic of his, could come to be true. And I'm not too proud to admit that I hope that every warning that I issued about Donald Trump ends up being wrong. I genuinely hope that I'm wrong, because I want to see our country succeed. But if this is the path we're headed on, then I'm very worried about what our country's future will look like moving forward.
Sarah Matthews, just to underscore what you're saying, I'll read one more quote from the Wall Street Journal story breaking in just since we've been on the air. This is a quote from a former Pentagon official. Quote, "Do they start wearing MAGA hats in formation to signal who's where?" asked one former senior Pentagon official. "The potential for this to go wrong is infinite."